I don't normally do basic reviews of games, but given this is a relatively significant new release, and since I definitely have opinions about it, I thought I'd take a little time to make a quick video about my thoughts on the medium. And as usual, let me stress that, although I called this a review, I'm not really trying to be objective. This is, after all, just a doddering old man's perspective. I will, however, try to avoid major spoilers. Now, I'm not really a fan of horror games as such. I'm not particularly susceptible to jump scares, but I do sometimes find the oppressive, bleak and high-stress atmosphere of horror games to be psychologically draining after extended play sessions. Even Doom, which I love beyond all bounds of reason, can stress me out after playing for too long. But I was intrigued enough by the brief preview videos I saw of the medium to be eager to give it a go. The whole aesthetic seemed appealingly otherworldly, and the whole split-screen dual realities element was definitely intriguing. Not going to lie though, if the game hadn't been available on Xbox Game Pass for Windows, I probably wouldn't have quite been willing to shell out the 70 or so Australian dollars that was the asking price. And I have to say, I would have been wise to hold on to my cash because I don't think the medium is worth anywhere near that much. My first impressions, however, were actually really good. In fact, it took a good couple of hours for it to become apparent just how flawed the medium really was. The game introduces you to Marianne, the central protagonist, as she prepares for the funeral of her adoptive father. The depiction of her father's house is nigh on perfect. It's dim, a little bleak perhaps in a recognisably Central European way, but also homely, comfortable, and host to a couple of cats, which is always a bonus in my book. The place is rendered in an extremely realistic, high-fidelity way, showcasing the game's high level of detail and fantastic lighting effects. And incidentally, I really appreciate the fact that more games these days are offering views of the world that are neither American nor Japanese, and it was really interesting just to encounter such a specifically Polish game. Anyway, most importantly, this opening section has genuine heart and emotion at its core, as Marianne wanders through the house looking for her father's tie clip, so she can send him off dressed as he would want to be dressed. We also get our first glimpse of Marianne's paranormal abilities, first in a small way as she uses some form of psychic insight to locate the tie clip, and then in a much bigger way as she enters the spirit world in order to guide her deceased father to his final rest. This is the first time the game utilises its unique selling point, the split screen effect that looks so intriguing in the trailers. On the left, Marianne remains in the mundane human world. On the right, Marianne, or maybe her spirit world alter ego, operates within a realm beyond mortal understanding, a place where the dead sometimes linger. The player controls both Marianne simultaneously, although later on the half of her that dwells in the spirit realm can be sent off separately from her corporeal form, albeit briefly. Again though, the more important part of this first foray into the spirit world is the emotional element. I was genuinely moved by the tender, loving way Marianne ushers the man who had acted as her father into true death. He is confused, disoriented, he doesn't know what's happening, but he still knows he loves his daughter. It's good stuff.
I've got so much work, my dear.
It's okay, Jack.
I can't just...
Let it go. It's not important.
You are crying. What's wrong, dear?
Unfortunately, this is easily the best section of the game. It's all downhill from here. There are some moments where the story approaches this emotional high point, but they're few and far between, and muddied by the vague, often cliched horror tropes that make up the rest of the narrative. The game does hint at some truly dark and potentially compelling story beats, but not enough is made of them, and the narrative is not quite coherent enough to express them well. If you've ever watched the YouTube channel CinemaSins, you might remember they often mention the pronoun game, referring to dialogue in which characters painstakingly avoid using actual names, so that the viewer is left in suspense. Well, they're left in suspense if it's done well. If it's not, they're more likely to end up confused and irritated at such an obvious ploy by the writers. And so it is in this game. The writers of the medium have turned the pronoun game into an art form, but not one that's very pleasing to the eye or the brain. For the most part though, the story isn't bad as such. Nothing comes close to matching the opening half hour or so, but it's serviceable. Up until the ending anyway. I won't spoil it, because the game's done that already. To borrow a joke from... Actually, I can't remember where I first heard it. Some YouTuber with more wit than me, I guess. When the credits started rolling, I could only look at the screen in astonishment. I found it tough to believe they'd leave it all so vague, so unsatisfying. My first thought was that it was blatant sequel bait, but I'm not sure it even contained enough substance to set up another game. I'm aware, of course, that there will be plenty of people who love the ending, and who appreciate the fact that it's so open to speculation. And that's fine, but to me it just seems really rather weak. But the story isn't this game's real problem. No, the thing that makes the medium a failure to my mind is the fact that the gameplay is incredibly insubstantial. It's barely a game at all, it's more of a narrative mood piece taking place in some admittedly gorgeously grotesque scenery. The vast majority of the gameplay consists of walking slowly to interactable objects, clearly highlighted by an icon to indicate they require your attention. Some of these objects can be taken with you, but most of them just give you a tiny insight into the wider narrative. Occasionally you will need to gather several objects to use together, but finding these objects is never ever a challenge, or even remotely interesting. They're always close at hand, usually in plain sight. There are a very few basic puzzles in the game, such as putting 3 photos in the correct order or figuring out the 4-digit code needed to open a safe, but they're so simple and easy to solve that they barely deserve to be called puzzles. Probably the most complex puzzle in the game is a half-flooded section of a subterranean bunker, where you need to drain water from certain sections of the structure. But all this involves is draining one section, going to that section to turn a valve, then draining another section, going to that section to turn another valve, and then finally draining the central chamber, which, thanks to all your valve twiddling, is now free of water. There's nothing at all interesting about this process, other than the fairly predictable taunts of the monster that's pursuing you. All you're doing is walking down exquisitely rendered but fairly dull corridors. Now you might think, given I just said there's a monster pursuing you, that there's at least an interesting central antagonist for the player to contend with. And it is interesting, kind of, but purely in terms of the story, and most definitely not in terms of the gameplay. On the few occasions you do have to deal with the creature directly, the encounters boil down to either running away and hoping you don't choose the wrong way to turn, or crouching behind chest-high walls and waiting for it to walk away. Sometimes you need to find an item or activate an object to make it go away, but this never involves anything more than following a clearly signposted path and then interacting with the obvious interactable. Even the intriguing split-screen element and the fact you're simultaneously interacting with 2 versions of the same world is never used to good effect. The potential for this gameplay mechanic to facilitate creative, challenging puzzles is obvious, but the game only ever does so in the most minor way possible. Sometimes you need to interact with an object in one realm to alter the other realm in a way that allows you access to a new area. But the object you need to interact with is always obvious, the effect it has is always immediately apparent, the wasted potential is genuinely disappointing. Even the game world, highly detailed and lovingly rendered as it is likewise disappointing. Your journey through this world is almost entirely linear. There is no opportunity for exploration. At its most expansive, the game might offer you a few rooms to wander around in, but the path forward is almost always blindingly obvious. I did get disoriented a few times, but that was entirely down to my own foolishness, coupled with the game's use of fixed camera angles, which can make it a little tricky to properly orient yourself within the game world. On the topic of the fixed camera angles though, I think this was absolutely the right choice for the game. Of course, it helps elicit nostalgia from fans of old-school survival horror games, but it also allows the designers to frame the world they've created in precisely the way they intend the player to see it. In a game like this, where the visuals are so crucial to the overall experience, that's a sensible choice. It does mean that controlling your character takes some getting used to, especially when the camera shifts abruptly and you suddenly find yourself moving in a different direction. Fortunately, or unfortunately, really, it doesn't matter. There's not enough actual gameplay for the controls to actually have a real impact. I found myself thinking as I played the medium that it was like a $20 game with the visuals of a $100 game. That's Australian dollars, of course. In this part of the world, $100 or so is the standard cost of a new AAA game. Or at least it was until PS5 games started costing $120, but that's a different topic. But yes, the medium reminded me in many ways of cheap indie games on Steam, games that didn't have the budget to incorporate complex, sophisticated gameplay, and so had to rely on narrative and atmosphere to create a compelling experience for the player. Some of them are successful, a lot of them are not, but they all tend to be cheap. The medium isn't cheap, however. True, it's not quite a full-price AAA game, but at $75 Australian, it's getting there. And I'm sure that price is justified, at least in terms of how much money was spent on its production. Creating such a brilliantly detailed world, or more accurately, two brilliantly detailed worlds, the corporeal realm and the spirit realm, must have taken a lot of people a lot of time. But for the actual amount of gameplay on offer, I honestly don't think shelling out $75 is an attractive proposition, so I'm truly glad I didn't. But hey, as usual, I seem to be in the minority. On Steam, where people had to pay for the game, it's got an 85% positive rating from over 1,300 reviews, and it's got a good deal of critical praise, which really does surprise me. I mean, I can imagine serious lovers of horror might find it appealing, but even for them, I would have thought this game would be best consumed by watching a long play on YouTube, rather than actually playing it. So, hey, what do I know? Well, that's my perspective on the medium. I wanted to like it, I really did. I thought it might finally be the horror game that made me really appreciate the genre, but it did not. Oh well. Okay, thanks for watching. Please do like, comment and subscribe, if you feel like it. Just a reminder that I've got a page on Ko-fi.com if you want to donate to support the channel. All donations are incredibly meaningful to me. Just read what I've posted on that page before committing any of your hard-earned dosh. Links in the description. For now though, get off my lawn.